Yes, 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 yes. Finally, people, my new book is out, Emotional Intuition for Peak Performance. It takes a long time sometimes to write these books and get these books published, I tell you. I actually wrote Emotional Intuition for Peak Performance way back in 2017, if you can believe it, in a small, hot apartment in Chiang Mai. And you ask, 2020, why so long? That's the publishing industry. It usually takes 18 months, usually, from when you sign the contract until it's published. And so before that period, obviously there was a little bit of editing and additions to the book, but we finally got there. We're here today. The book is published. Excited about it. I hope you've all got a copy in your hands right now. I don't, because of this pandemic. I can't get the hard copies of the books. Well, not yet, not yet. They are coming. They are coming. So I'm really excited about this, yeah? So I want to talk to you guys actually just about the table of contents today, just to give you kind of a brief overview of what's in the book. And so to get you excited about it too, especially if you haven't bought the book or if you have the book in your hands. And I mentioned actually in last week's video that this book is kind of an extension from Fasting the Mind and also Effortless Living. And yes, this is true. It's still its own book, don't get me wrong. But if you look at the evolution of that work, of those two books, this is kind of an extension of that and making it much more practical for your life. So some of the philosophy and everything I teach in Effortless Living and Fasting the Mind, this book is about actualizing that philosophy, but also going deep into cognitive science as well, cognitive science and especially Taoist thought. So I said last week in the top 5 books video that David Chai's book's the Taoist book of the year, but just to be a bit biased, I'll say that my book is the Taoist book of the year. So for all of you who enjoy Taoist thought, make sure you go out and get this book. But I don't just speak about Taoism in this book as well. As you know, I do teach Eastern philosophy, so I speak a lot also about Vedanta in this book and also Buddhism and a lot of the practical tips and the way that we can implement this deep philosophy into our life is based on those three great traditions: Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism. And so like I said, I want to speak to you about the table of contents. So first of all, the introduction is called The Formula for Expert Skill and Peak Performance. So here I'm kind of introducing this formula for attaining expert skill and peak performance. And as the title suggests, this book is about what it takes to reach peak performance, not just in your chosen skill or craft, but also a way of life that we can live as well, which is also very important, especially from the Taoist perspective. It's not enough to understand Wu Wei and not enough to understand Wu Wei within your skill if you don't implement that into everyday life, as you always hear me harp on about. So that introduction, to give you a loose description, is about a formula moving forward that we can use within the book. And then we move into part 1. Now, part 1 is simply called skill. Now, the first chapter of part 1, or chapter 1, is the embodied mind. Now, in the embodied mind, I speak a lot about the disembodied myth. So this idea of mind-body dualism that has kind of developed over a long period of time, which has led into rationality and a whole world being overly rational. And now this is completely opposite to the way life is perceived within the Eastern spiritual traditions, which is mind-body holism, which leads into a holistic view of the world and of oneself in relation to the world. And so this is also very important to understand. But what I'm talking about here, when I mention the embodied mind, we're talking about that mind-body holism of that there's actually no duality between mind and body. So this idea of mind-body dualism is kind of an illusion we've bought into. So I won't go more into that, but that's kind of, you're touching that understanding, and that's kind of breaking the surface for further explorations within this book. And this leads into chapter 2, which is intelligent spontaneity. So this is the knowledge of Wu-Wei within not just Taoism, but within also Zen Buddhism, and how intelligent spontaneity is actually very important to act in a genuine manner, but also to act in a way that we can act immediately and appropriate to each and every situation, which also contributes to a skill that we're trying to attain, and also just being, in life, being in harmony with society, with one's immediate reality. So that also contributes to that as well, as I always mention. Now, chapter 3 is discipline and structure. So what we're talking about here, which may seem counterintuitive to some so-called Taoists out there, is that this idea of discipline and structure can be like against the idea of, allowing life to be in this and that. It doesn't have to be, actually. So, you got to remember, Wu-Wei is also about doing, non-doing. So effortless action. So this idea of like in the Bhagavad Gita, the nishkama karma that Krishna explains to Arjuna, where you're not attached to the fruits of your labor. So you got to learn to have this psychological state where you're in motion, but you're not analytically thinking about it. So, which is a big problem when we are rational and we are, we bought into this idea of mind-body dualism. So I go into why discipline and structure can actually benefit the embodied mind, and you may think that that's simplistic, but it's not as simplistic as what you think. But I go deeply into that. And that ends part 1. So now we lead into part 2. Now, part 2 is simply called training. Now, in part 2, the first chapter, or the 4th chapter of the book, is called the 4 fundamentals. Now, the 4 fundamentals in the book are what contribute to creating masterpiece days, or creating a life that is in harmony with everything else and is essentially a masterpiece of your own life, which contributes, like as I said, to the harmony of all life, to the contribution of the evolution of humanity, and inspires others. So these 4 fundamentals are the basics that we need to stick to when we're talking about the cultivation of skill and trying to attain peak performance. And those 4 fundamentals are sleep, nutrition, meditation, and exercise. And so those 4, if applied daily, contribute to a greater version of yourself that's waiting to be born. It's already there, but we've bought into all of this mind-body dualism. We've bought into this idea that there's a lot of worth issues in the world, as you know. People don't feel that they're worthy, or that they don't have a meaning, or they don't contribute to humanity. And this is all kind of a psychopathy that is developed in the world, where we have this internalized inferiority complex. And this book is trying to get you out of that, essentially, to say that you are worthy, but you need to sort of gain control of the things in your life that you can control. You can control how you meditate, the hours you sleep, the food you eat, and if you're an active person, if you move your body and you exercise. This is very simple, right? So, but in this chapter, it goes in deep into all 4 of these, and it gives you this kind of a framework of moving forward of how we need to train not only our mind, but also our body. But this also leads into the 5th chapter, which is cultivate intelligence and harness creativity. So what's the point of creating masterpiece days with, eating well and this and that? You need to let the human life shine, right? So how does the human life shine? Well, first of all, we don't pay any attention to cultivating intelligence anymore. Well, I shouldn't say we don't. I shouldn't generalize it, but there's a large portion of humanity who are just invested in entertainment these days, right? So not a lot of people are invested in intelligence. Those who are usually invested in intelligence, who cultivate intelligence, usually live fairly successful lives, or usually live at least peaceful lives, because they have a deep understanding of reality. And so we're trying to cultivate intelligence, and I give you like a framework of how to cultivate intelligence in the book, and what that will do to you, and how that will contribute to the greater well-being of yourself and humanity. But also there's the harnessing creativity aspect of this chapter, which is very important, because usually if you're a healthy person, the fruit of being a healthy person is the creativity that you exhibit, that you create, and the world sees. This is usually the evidence of a healthy and sane person, because we all have a creative intuition within us, which is dying to be born, because we're usually in this habit of suppressing it. But what I explain in the book, I explain how to harness this creativity and how to let it shine, and how to basically allow yourself to expose that intrinsic nature that you have there, that is not being expressed in the world. And we need that divine creativity a lot in the world these days, especially in an over-rational world. Now, the 6th chapter is called Fasting the Mind. Now, for those of you who are familiar with my book, Fasting the Mind, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. And I even go into more in this chapter than I actually did in my original book. But it's kind of like a brief exploration, because it's only a chapter, right? It's not a whole book. So I talk about this idea of fasting the mind in Eastern thought that comes from the Zhuangzi text, and also it's in the traditions of Advaita Vedanta, Vipassana in Buddhism, and these great traditions. So this idea of fasting the mind, which has a deep effect on your nervous system, which then allows the hot cognition to take over, that spontaneous cognition that basically controls most of our life, but to allow that to shine through our creativity and allowing that to inspire others. So I go into a lot in that one, in that chapter on fasting the mind. And that actually ends part 2. Now we're talking about part 3. Now part 3 is called optimization. So we're basically trying to implement everything we've learned in the book from at this stage. Now we're talking about how to optimize our life. What's the use of knowing all of this great knowledge and these practical tips if we can't optimize our life? So this part is really explaining to you a little bit of the experience of peak performance, what it is from a conscious level. And I use many examples in the book, especially of athletes and artists. So chapter 7 is called The Nature of Peak Performance. So as I said, we're talking here about the experience of peak performance and what that feels like. We hear a lot of people say being in the zone, but what does that actually feel like? My subtitle of the book is actually, the secrets from the sages for being in the zone. So being in the zone is actually in the title. And so the subtitle is saying from the sages for how to be in the zone. That's because I do speak a lot about that from Taoist perspective, from Zhuangzi, Lao Tzu, but also from other great Eastern spiritual teachers in the book. But I also talk about it from the scientific perspective, as I mentioned, especially from cognitive science. But what does that feel like? Well, that's what I go into in this chapter. And I don't want to say too much about that, because I don't want to give everything away about the book. But as I said, I use examples. I give a thorough examination of what that feeling of peak performance feels like, that feeling of being in the zone. And can that be implemented into just ordinary life? Something I speak about actually in Effortless Living. And then we get to the last chapter, chapter 8. And it's called Become a Master, Live Your Legend. So this is basically as I said, it's about actualizing everything you've read in the book. It's about how to become a master, not just in a craft or a skill, but in life in general, and about how you need to live your legend. You know, you often hear that phrase, they are living their legend. And, you know, you don't have to become anybody in life, You know that from watching my channel for a long time. But usually when you master something or you become a virtuous person, sometimes that's a byproduct. It's not always a byproduct, don't get me wrong. I know many spiritual teachers, especially in India, who are way, way, way beyond anyone you see on YouTube or you've seen on TV or whatever. But they're isolated up in the Himalayas, and there's, small group of people around them and so forth and so on. I mean, India's littered with great teachers like that. But not just India, but there's also hermits and so forth and so on in places like China. So, why I'm saying that is it's not, as I said, it's not so important to be somebody, but it can become a byproduct if you are completely engaged in a skill or completely engaged in your life and how you're living your life in a pure and harmonious manner. So, that's just a quick rundown of the book. I mean, I could get into a lot on this. I mean, I could do a lecture on this if I wanted to. But I just want to give you guys a brief overview of the table of contents because, I'm super excited about the book coming out, and I'm excited for you all to read it, It's been peer reviewed a lot before publication. There's only been high praise. And I'm just excited for just people to read it in general, and it's really good as an author to get feedback and to get an understanding of what people think about your work. I'm not so overly protective of my work. If people don't like it, they don't like it. Not everyone's going to like everything, right? So, but from the peer reviews that I have, all signs are pretty positive. And I can just actually I'll give you one quote, maybe, let's have a look. I'll give you a quote. I'll give you two peer review quotes. One's from Ben Lynch. Dr. Ben Lynch, actually, is the author of Dirty Genes. He said about my book, "Are you hot or cold? Do you react or respond? Or are you warm? A mix of both. In emotional intuition for peak performance, be prepared to understand what it truly means to be hot-headed or cool and collected. In order to be in the zone, we must be aware of what cognitive temperature we're operating with. Jason describes the positives of both and how a blend is optimal." He's kind of getting into there a little bit about the embodied cognition I talk about. And another one I want to read is from a good friend of mine, Damo Mitchell, a Taoist teacher. He said, "It is often the case that we focus on what to do in life and not how we do it. If we wish to reach the highest levels of our chosen field, then an effective methodology is going to be needed. In this book, Jason Gregory expertly breaks down the psychology, spiritual elements, and practices of optimizing your personal potential. In doing so, what Jason has gifted to those seeking mastery in life is an invaluable guide to the how of approaching any given field." And Damo kind of hits it nail on the head there, because a lot of us aren't taught the how. I was never taught the how. This book, it's in and of itself is the accumulation of 10 years of research on, 10 years of teaching Eastern philosophy, but more so like 15 years of research of Eastern philosophy, and also its relationship to peak performance and being in the zone and so forth and so on. So, we're often taught, as Damo said, what to do. This is how you do it, but not how you do it, So, which is kind of strange when you think about it, right? So, So I appreciate that. There's many other endorsements here. I don't want to get all to them. I just wanted to read both of those. So I hope you guys got a lot out of this video, right? And just I hope you go out and get the book. I hope you enjoy it. And please share it with your friends. And if you do enjoy this book and you have not read any of my previous books, I highly recommend going out and getting Effortless Living or Fasting the Mind if you enjoyed this book. But if you also want to read something different from me along in Eastern spirituality, then I highly recommend Enlightenment Now or The Science and Practice of Humility. All of those links are in the description. So I'm just excited. New books out. You don't know what it takes actually for an author to create a book, and the process of publishing and editing and working with publishers and waiting for deadlines, I should say reaching deadlines, and also waiting for books to be published. I knew this was going to be published June 16 back a year ago. So to give you an idea, and that's even 6 months in after signing the contract and so forth and so on. So that's what it takes. All of the book I have completed now, you probably won't see that for another 2 years, unfortunately. So more about that another time. So I hope you guys are all doing well. Please consider my book, and any of my books actually, and please let me know what you think about it. And I hope you're all doing well. Hope you're staying fit, healthy, remaining calm and peaceful. And I'll see you guys next time. Shanti, shanti, shanti.